Lee Marvin finally tells the truth about Cary Grant, and it all starts long before Hollywood ever came calling. Born on February 19, 1924, in New York City, Marvin entered the world with privilege on paper, but chaos behind closed doors. His father, Lamont Waltman Marvin, was a sharp advertising executive and a hardened World War I veteran, while his mother, Courtney Washington David, came from a proud Virginia family with deep Southern roots and strict expectations. From the outside, it looked respectable. Inside, it was anything but stable. Discipline clashed with rebellion, and young Lee pushed back hard. His childhood was loud, volatile, and constantly on edge. He was kicked out of multiple schools, not because he couldn't keep up, but because he refused to fall in line. Teachers labeled him difficult, but what they were really seeing was a simmering defiance that would later explode on screen. That restless energy didn't fade with age, it sharpened. When World War II erupted, Marvin didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps and was sent straight into the brutal Pacific Theater, where fantasy vanished and survival ruled every second. During the Battle of Saipan, Marvin was hit by machine gun fire, a moment that nearly ended everything. He survived, but the war carved itself into him. The pain, the fear, the bodies, the silence afterward, it all stayed. That injury left scars you couldn't always see, shaping how he viewed life, men, and violence itself. This wasn't method acting later on. This was memory. The toughness audiences saw wasn't manufactured drama, it was lived truth. Awarded the Purple Heart, Marvin carried proof of what he'd endured. After returning home, lost and unanchored, he drifted through odd jobs, even working as a plumber's assistant, before something unexpected pulled him toward the stage. Acting didn't soften him, it gave his past a voice, and the man Hollywood would one day fear and admire was already fully formed. Acting came naturally to him, almost too naturally, and people noticed fast. That deep, gravelly voice, the cold stare, the way he filled a room without saying a word, it made him impossible to ignore. He started in small theater productions, learning the craft the hard way, night after night. No safety net, no glamour. Before long, television and film followed, and by the early 1950s, Marvin was everywhere, usually cast as villains, soldiers, or hard-edged men who looked like trouble the second they walked on screen. Those early roles were small, but they hit hard. Even with limited lines, Marvin stole scenes because he felt real. Directors didn't have to explain toughness to him. He didn't pretend to be dangerous. He carried it naturally. Audiences sensed it too, that authenticity you can't fake. Casting agents whispered his name, knowing this guy brought something raw Hollywood didn't know how to polish. His breakthrough came in the late 1950s and early 1960s with films like The Wild One, Bad Day at Black Rock, and The Big Heat, where his menacing presence lingered long after the credits rolled. He didn't just play threats, he was the tension in the room. Then came the shocker. In Cat Ballou, Marvin flipped expectations completely, playing both the drunken gunslinger Kid Shalene and his ruthless twin. The performance stunned Hollywood. Suddenly, the toughest man in the room was also the funniest, mocking his own image without mercy. That fearless turn won him the Academy Award for Best Actor and rewrote how studios saw him. It proved there was more beneath the stoic glare. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Marvin ruled American cinema, anchoring classics like The Dirty Dozen, Point Blank, Hell in the Pacific, and Paint Your Wagon, proving again and again that Hollywood didn't tame Lee Marvin, it adjusted itself around him. Each performance carried his unmistakable mix of grit and emotional weight, and it hit audiences right in the gut. Whether he was a battle-scarred soldier, a cold-blooded hitman, or a reluctant anti-hero dragging his past behind him, Marvin never faked a second of it. The pain, the anger, the silence, it all felt earned. His collaborations with directors like John Boorman and Robert Aldrich exposed just how wide his range truly was. In a single role, he could be brutal one moment, reflective the next, then unexpectedly funny or devastatingly human, all without breaking character. Off-screen, Lee Marvin was just as intense and layered as the men he played. He was famous for his blunt honesty, a no-nonsense attitude, and a hard-living lifestyle that never tried to hide behind studio polish. A heavy drinker and fiercely outspoken, Marvin regularly clashed with Hollywood's carefully managed image machine. He didn't care about fitting in, and he didn't pretend to be anything he wasn't. Yet people close to him told a different story. Beneath the rough edges was a sharp mind, deep intelligence, and unwavering loyalty to the few he trusted. His dry wit could cut through a room instantly. He despised pretenses, valued truth over diplomacy, and that raw authenticity earned him respect from colleagues who preferred honesty over charm. Despite the tough exterior, Marvin carried a surprisingly introspective side. He often spoke quietly about his discomfort with fame, openly expressing disdain for Hollywood's artificial world. In his later years, success continued, though controversy followed close behind. He worked steadily into the 1980s, delivering powerful performances in The Big Red One and Gorky Park, even as his health declined from years of smoking and drinking. Age slowed his body, but not his presence. Even late in life, Marvin commanded the screen effortlessly. There was something timeless about him, a man who looked like he belonged under harsh lights and heavy shadows, as if the silver screen had been waiting for him all along. A man who carried the spirit of the Old West and the exhausted soul of a soldier at the same time. Lee Marvin's personal life was just as layered and turbulent as the characters he brought to life on screen. Love, loyalty, chaos, and contradiction followed him everywhere. Over the course of his life, he married twice, and each marriage reflected a different version of the man he was becoming. First, during his climb toward recognition, and later, when he had already become a hardened Hollywood force. His first marriage began in 1952, when he married Betty Ebeling, right as his acting career was barely taking shape. At that point, Marvin wasn't a star, not even close. He was scraping by on small television roles and low-budget films, fighting for visibility while living with constant uncertainty. Betty became his anchor during those years, offering stability when nothing else in his life felt secure. She was patient, supportive, and steady, a grounding force when Marvin's temperament could swing hard and fast. Together, they built a family, raising 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters, while Marvin slowly climbed from forgettable bit parts to roles that finally turned heads. As his career gained traction, the pressure inside the home grew louder. Fame brought longer shoots, constant travel, and deeper immersion into Hollywood's nightlife. Marvin's intense personality, which audiences admired on screen, became far more difficult behind closed doors. His fondness for heavy drinking and late nights added fuel to the strain, and the balance they once shared began to crack under the weight of success. The man who played toughness so convincingly didn't know how to turn it off. After 15 years of marriage, the tension reached its breaking point and the couple divorced in 1967. Still, despite the split, Betty remained one of the few people who truly understood Marvin's complicated inner world. Their bond didn't disappear, and their children continued to be a central part of his life, even as everything else around him kept shifting. 3 years later, in 1970, Lee Marvin married Pamela Feely, a woman who had already been part of his world long before they ever said their vows. This time, the timing was completely different. Marvin was no longer fighting for recognition. He was already cemented as one of Hollywood's most respected and feared tough guy actors, with a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. Pamela was often described as elegant, intelligent, and strong-willed, and she brought a sense of control and grounding that Marvin desperately needed. She wasn't dazzled by fame, and she wasn't intimidated by his intensity. While their relationship was deeply affectionate, it was never simple. Marvin's heavy drinking and unpredictable temper occasionally spilled into public view, sparking tension and uncomfortable moments that tabloids loved to chase. Still, Pamela never wavered. Her loyalty became legendary among those close to the couple. She stood firm, absorbing the chaos without feeding it, earning quiet admiration from friends who understood just how difficult life with Marvin could be. They lived together in Tucson, Arizona, and later in the small seaside town of Mount Kisco, New York, before eventually settling in Los Angeles. Each move reflected a search for calm that Marvin rarely found on his own. Pamela's presence added balance to his life, especially as health problems began creeping in during his later years. Through career highs and personal lows, she stayed beside him, unshaken. Their marriage, however, unfolded under a harsh spotlight due to a highly publicized legal battle involving Marvin's former companion, Michelle Triola. In the late 1970s, she sued Marvin for financial support, igniting one of the most talked-about courtroom dramas Hollywood had seen in years. The case dragged on relentlessly, pulling Marvin's private life into the headlines. Through every brutal headline and courtroom twist, Pamela remained at his side. She faced the media storm with quiet resolve, refusing to fracture under pressure, proving once again that strength didn't always need to shout to be felt. Unlike his first marriage, which collapsed under pressure and distance, Marvin's second marriage lasted until his death in 1987. And that difference meant everything. In his later years, Lee Marvin openly credited Pamela with helping him find a sense of calm he had never known before. After decades of chaos, noise, and relentless attention, she became his anchor. She was there during his final days, and friends close to the couple described their bond as one built on deep mutual respect, quiet loyalty, and an affection that never needed to be performed. Marvin was never a man who softened his words. His gravelly voice, rough-edged honesty, and blunt delivery were as much a part of him as the battle-hardened characters he played on screen. He didn't filter himself to protect reputations or polish legacies. When asked about his Hollywood contemporaries later in life, Marvin spoke plainly, sometimes uncomfortably so, but always honestly. One name that came up again and again was Cary Grant, long celebrated as the ultimate symbol of Hollywood elegance and sophistication. To the public, Grant was charm perfected, style without effort, grace personified. But Marvin saw something deeper and far more calculated beneath that flawless exterior. In one candid interview, Marvin didn't hold back. "Cary Grant was a hell of a guy to watch on screen," Marvin said. "But off camera, he was one of the most private men you'd ever meet." He went on, explaining that everything Grant did was deliberate. Everything he did was calculated, not in a bad way, but in a professional way. He understood the power of image better than anyone I ever met in this town. For Marvin, who prided himself on being raw, instinctive, and unapologetically unrefined, Grant's controlled composure felt almost foreign. He didn't criticize it, but he didn't pretend to relate to it either. Marvin found Grant fascinating precisely because he was the opposite of himself, a man who mastered restraint in a town that rewarded excess. He continued without softening a single edge. "I was a Marine, for God's sake. I didn't know how to polish an image," Marvin said. "Cary was born for it." In Marvin's eyes, Cary Grant could walk into a room and instantly command belief, like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine cover, already dressed in a tuxedo and perfectly at ease. Marvin genuinely admired that discipline and sharp intelligence, even if it felt completely alien to his own nature. But Marvin didn't stop there. Beneath the smooth voice and flawless smile, he believed Grant carried something heavier. "People thought Cary was just this charming Englishman with the perfect smile," Marvin said. "But Archie Leach, that's who he really was never far away." Archie Leach, the insecure boy from Bristol, never fully disappeared, no matter how refined the image became. Marvin believed Grant fought relentlessly to bury that earlier version of himself. "He worked hard to keep it down," Marvin explained. "You could see it in his eyes if you looked long enough." To Marvin, Grant's transformation from a struggling working-class kid to Hollywood's most debonair leading man was both stunning and deeply sad at the same time. Reinvention came at a cost, and Marvin could see the toll it took year after year. He respected Grant's ability to maintain the illusion, but he also pitied how exhausting it must have been to keep it alive forever. Marvin also pointed out that while Grant was always polite and gracious, he remained emotionally distant. "He wasn't the kind of guy who'd go drinking with you after a shoot," Marvin said. "Cary didn't need that. Grant had his own rhythm, his own carefully guarded circle. I don't think he ever really let anyone in completely," Marvin admitted. Coming from a man who lived loudly, openly, and without filters, that kind of emotional distance was almost impossible to understand. Having survived war, loss, and fame, Marvin valued authenticity above all else, and in Grant, he saw brilliance wrapped tightly in control. To Marvin, Cary Grant's polished perfection felt less like freedom and more like a beautifully decorated cage, as much a burden as it was a crown. Still, Marvin never denied Grant's overwhelming talent, not for a second. You could put him in front of a camera doing absolutely nothing and people would be glued to him, Marvin admitted. That's star power. You can't fake that. For Marvin, that kind of effortless pull was almost unreal. Guys like me, he added. We had to growl and bleed to make people watch Cary. Grant didn't need grit to command attention. He just smiled, and the entire room shifted. He'd smile, Marvin said, and the whole damn place lit up. There was no bitterness in his voice, only awe. Marvin respected that natural magnetism deeply, even if he personally couldn't live inside that kind of restraint and refinement. To him, Cary Grant was one of the last true movie stars, a man who understood exactly how to make the camera fall in love with him without ever breaking a sweat. Grant didn't chase the lens chased him. Marvin saw that as a rare gift, something studios couldn't manufacture no matter how hard they tried. He believed Grant knew precisely when to hold back, when to lean in, and when to disappear just enough to stay mysterious. That level of control fascinated Marvin, even as it felt completely opposite to everything he believed in. When asked if he and Grant ever worked together or spent time socially, Marvin laughed hard. "Cary Grant and me in the same picture?" he said. "That would have been like mixing bourbon with champagne. It doesn't work." The contrast amused him endlessly. He represented the high life, Marvin joked, and I represented the bar fight. Yet Marvin couldn't resist adding one more sharp observation. "I'll tell you this," he said. "If Cary Grant had been born a few decades later, he might have been tougher." Marvin believed there was something hidden beneath that immaculate polish, a quiet edge Grant never fully allowed himself to show on screen, a harder version that stayed locked away. In the end, Marvin's reflections weren't fueled by jealousy or resentment. They were about two radically different men who defined masculinity on their own terms. Grant, smooth and composed, embodied the dream of perfection. Marvin, scarred and blunt, embodied the truth of imperfection. Different paths, different masks, but both undeniably real in the worlds they ruled. "You can't fake being Cary Grant," Marvin concluded. "And you sure as hell can't fake being Lee Marvin." That line said everything. We both knew who we were, even if we came at it from opposite ends of the street. In those words, Lee Marvin laid bare a rare kind of honesty. The kind that cuts through Hollywood's gloss and lands straight on the truth. He wasn't impressed by illusion, and he wasn't threatened by it either. He saw past the spotlight and into the people standing beneath it. Marvin's reflections on Cary Grant carried both respect and sharp insight. He acknowledged that beneath the tailored suits, perfect posture, and silver screen smiles, Grant was just as human as anyone else in the business. In Marvin's world, that recognition wasn't an insult. It was the highest compliment possible. To him, humanity mattered more than polish, and truth mattered more than charm. By late 1986, however, Marvin's own body was beginning to fail him in ways even his toughness couldn't overpower. In December of that year, his declining health took a frightening turn when he was hospitalized for more than 2 weeks due to complications from coccidioidomycosis, a serious fungal infection commonly known as valley fever. It was a disease contracted by inhaling airborne spores found in dry, dusty regions of the American Southwest, particularly California and Arizona, places where Marvin had spent years filming and living. For most people, the illness caused mild, flu-like symptoms and passed quietly. But Marvin wasn't most people anymore. Years of heavy smoking and drinking had weakened his immune system, leaving his body vulnerable. The infection spread aggressively, developing into a severe respiratory illness that hit his lungs hard. Already damaged from decades of tobacco use, his lungs struggled to do their job. Breathing became labored, exhausting, and frightening. Doctors administered steroids in an effort to reduce inflammation and ease his breathing, a common treatment, but one loaded with risks given Marvin's fragile condition. The medication provided temporary relief, but the cost was steep. While the steroids helped his lungs in the short term, they triggered serious side effects throughout his body. His strength faded, complications multiplied, And the man who had survived war, violence, and fame now faced an enemy he couldn't stare down. The decline was quiet, relentless, and deeply cruel, marking the beginning of the final chapter in the life of a man who had always lived without pretending. The damage was catastrophic. Marvin suffered major intestinal ruptures, a life-threatening complication that forced doctors into immediate emergency surgery. He underwent a colectomy, a brutal procedure that removed a portion of his colon, and it took an enormous toll on his already weakened body. Even after the operation, the pain never fully faded. Recovery was slow, exhausting, and filled with setbacks that drained what little strength he had left. The physical power that once carried him through war zones, dangerous stunt work, and decades of hard living was slipping away fast. Friends and family noticed the change immediately. The man who once dominated every room now appeared frail, thinner, and visibly worn down. His iconic, deep voice turned raspy, his posture stooped, and the towering presence audiences knew so well seemed to be fading before their eyes. Still, Marvin refused to surrender who he was. Despite constant pain and declining health, he faced his final chapter with the same unflinching toughness that had defined his entire life. He had never been a man who complained, and that didn't change now. Even when his body betrayed him, his spirit stayed stubbornly intact. Those closest to him said his dry humor never left. He joked, observed, and pushed back against pity right up until the end. His fierce independence remained untouched, even as walking became difficult and energy vanished. The contrast was heartbreaking, a steel-willed man trapped inside a body that could no longer keep up. On August 29, 1987, Lee Marvin died of a heart attack at the age of 63. His death didn't just mark the loss of a star, it marked the end of an era in Hollywood, a time when leading men were expected to be rugged, raw, and unapologetically unpolished. Marvin embodied that standard completely, on screen and off. His passing was mourned by fans, fellow actors, and filmmakers who admired his authenticity, professionalism, and brutal honesty. He never played a role he didn't believe in, and he never lived a life that wasn't real. Love him or fear him, Lee Marvin never pretended to be anything else. If you found this story powerful, make sure to like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood legends, and I'll see you on the next one.